Ladies and gentlemen, the webinar will start in just 5 minutes time, so 5 minutes to the start of the webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, the webinar will start in just 4 minutes time, so 4 minutes to the start of the webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just 3 minutes until the start of the webinar. So the webinar will start in just 3 minutes time. Ladies and gentlemen, just 2 minutes. 2 minutes to the start of the webinar. The webinar will start in just 2 minutes time. Ladies and gentlemen, the webinar will start in just 1 minute time. So webinar will be beginning in just 60 seconds. Webinar will begin momentarily. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the webinar. We have a very important topic for you this morning and some fabulous people able to address that topic. But before I do introduce our panelists today, I'd like to basically just run through a couple of issues. So, Sarah, if we could move on to the next slide. Just a reminder, Channel Focus in person is coming up on the 11th to the 13th of November this year in Dana Point, California. We'll have over 300 channel executives attending the event. Love to see you there. For the first time at Channel Focus, the Women's Leadership Council, which has always been a very important part of the event, will be running a gala awards dinner on the evening of November the 13th. And the Women's Leadership Council meeting will follow Channel Focus on November the 14th. So please put those dates in your diary. If you use the code EARLYBIRD, you can register for $15.95. The regular price being $22.95. So it's a huge saving. So persuade your boss. It's going to be an absolutely awesome event and look forward to seeing everyone there. So please get involved, ask questions, make comments, talk to our panelists, use the chat, and let's make this a very, very lively session. And I am now going to introduce three terrific people who have been guiding us through the topic. It's not just AWS. How do you work with Google, Azure, and Oracle? And our first speaker is Ross Brown. And Ross is a former channel chief. He's been a channel chief at Oracle, VMware, Microsoft, and Citrix. Ross is a really innovative executive who creates original and game-changing approaches to partnerships. Our second panelist is Richard Flynn. Richard is the partner and CMO at Spur Reply. He's a founder of the Spur Group, an industry veteran with nearly 30 years experience. And during that time, he's helped many companies in the tech industry shape and execute their channel strategies and go-to-market approaches. Currently, Spur Group has nearly 250 go-to-market employees sharing their expertise across a range of sales, marketing, channels, operations, and data projects. Richard's a firm believer that we face a new renaissance of channel innovation as companies redefine their go-to-market approach, as cloud solutions and remote workers become the norm. In his time off, Richard focuses on family, painting, and architecture. He finds his once empty nest become crowded once again as his college-age kids find their way home during these current times. And our third speaker is Brian Kane, and Brian is head of ISV strategy and transformation at Google Cloud. Brian works at Google Cloud, but has previously worked at AWS and Microsoft, so truly understands the cloud marketplace. During that time, he's held a variety of roles spanning strategy, partner management, sales, and product management. He's worked on the customer side, driving cloud and AI projects. So Ross, Richard, and Brian, welcome. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us this afternoon.
Sure.
And I'd like to start with an opening question to each of you. Maybe I can do it in reverse order, Brian, and start with you. Why? We've got people on the call, they're running channel programs, they've got partners, many of whom will have projects already in place with AWS. Why should they be multi-cloud?
Yeah, thank you, Rod, and great to speak with everyone here. And as you've mentioned, I've worked for all three of the largest cloud providers, of course, with others like Oracle and others out there. First, I really think it starts with the customer. So I think when you kind of look at AWS being the first mover, a lot of partners and a lot of customers started with AWS for that reason. For anyone who's kind of paid attention to just the growth of each cloud, both Microsoft and Google recently announced their quarterly earnings, both growing at close to 30% year-over-year growth. So with Google Cloud, that was 28%. With Microsoft, I think a little bit closer to 30. And so really it starts with customers. My main focus is on ISVs. And with Marketplace being the primary route to market, we go to market with partners. And a lot of times that really starts with cloud committed spend. So exiting 2023, customers had a backlog with Google Cloud of $74 billion. In other words, that's spend that was committed to Google Cloud that's not yet turned into revenue. Each of the other cloud providers also have revenue backlogs and commits. And from an ISV or a software company perspective, tapping into that cloud committed spend, being able to draw down that cloud spend is very motivating. So from a partner perspective, what a lot of partners will tell me is we're going multi-cloud. That could be 3 clouds if you're using, let's say, a developer tool where your core value proposition is to be wherever the customer is. More generally speaking, if you're supporting at least 2 clouds, you're able to tap into that cloud committed spend and those marketplace benefits with the vast majority of customers, as most customers are becoming multi-cloud.
Excellent. And Ross, multi-cloud, what do we need to do to get there?
Well, just to highlight on what Brian was talking about and sort of this trend towards multi-cloud that seems to be growing, clouds are differentiating. Like if you look at 10 years ago at what services were available on GCP, AWS, and Azure, they were very similar. You had a set of PaaS services that were somewhat proprietary, but compute is compute, storage is storage, and to a large extent, I think AWS has built a more proprietary, specialized cloud, being first than folks that followed. If you look at Azure and GCP and Oracle, they're more run native VMs, run native services, and manage your own Kubernetes environment, manage your own containers as opposed to managed services. So I would just advise people as you look at them just to realize that it's no longer, when you look at a cloud, of which cloud am I choosing, it's now which cloud am I choosing for what work. And there's certain things that work exceedingly well inside of Azure, like .NET environments and things like that, and stuff built on SQL Server works really well. Cloud native works really well at Google. You want enterprise, systems of record working well. Oracle's got the solution for that with bare metal and Exadata and things like that. You need global planetary cloud scale from scratch. AWS has great tools for that. So they're not the same. And if you looked at it 10 years ago, we'd say they're all the same trunk on the same tree. Now you look at the tips of the branches and they're vastly different. So I think what's the incumbent thing for partners is to really assess clearly, not our cloud platform is X, now what can go there? The question is, across the entire state, what makes sense in which cloud and how do I manage them together? And I think increasingly that's creating opportunity for partners to really think about how do I arbitrate those decisions.
Excellent. And Richard, bringing you into this, what are you seeing your clients doing? How are they approaching this? Richard, you're muted. You're muted, Richard.
Yeah, sorry, trying to unmute. It wasn't working the way I wanted. Anyway, I think that what we're seeing is that most are expanding to multiple clouds. Many of them have started with one cloud. It's usually AWS. Sometimes it's Azure. But I think that for all the reasons that have been mentioned, you really are looking to try to figure out how to do it on multiple platforms now. And so, of course, the real challenge is how do you scale your side of the business to be able to operate across, 2, 3, 4, cloud partners that you're working with. And that's where the challenge today that we're seeing companies really facing is how do they scale that way.
Richard, I think that's a really key point on the scaling in multi-cloud is hard.
Yep.
You have to decide what you're using out of that cloud that's proprietary intentionally. And that's often accidental. People fall into, well, it was super easy to spin up Lambda and connect it to S3 and off and running. And then they realize I built this entire architecture that can never move. Yeah. And so there's intentionality of what's different that shouldn't be different versus where are you really taking advantage of things like Looker and BigQuery, which are unique services on GCP that scale really well. And where are you just using a managed Kubernetes service because it's convenient, but it locks you into a cloud? So those intentionality, I think, is a big choice around scale.
And we're seeing that there's lots of different names for them, but you've got legacy vendors who have had a long tradition of doing business with partners, and their issue is how do they move their business to a marketplace into a cloud environment? And in many cases, their operational backend is not optimized for running across multiple platforms. And then you've got more of the born in the cloud partners that have always been playing in this space. Well, they generally started out by being partner with one cloud partner, and so their issue is that, yeah, they've got all the back-end infrastructure to support, the APIs and all the things that you need, but it's all proprietary to one vendor. And now they have to re-engineer those processes to make them work with multiple vendors. And so, there's some unique challenges depending on where you are and what your business history is.
Great. And Brian, just explain to everyone on the call, because I'm sure some people don't fully understand, what is this commitment? How does it work? And if there's loads of money out there, how do I get some of that?
Yeah, great question, Rob. And Ross and Richard, feel free to add on here. So first, as a framing comment, there's different estimates of what percentage of enterprise workloads are actually deployed in the cloud. Most of the ones I've seen are maybe in the range of 20 to 25%. So what that means is, depending on what type of partner you are, there's this huge opportunity of 75% of workloads that I might be biased coming from 3 different cloud providers, but the belief is that the majority of those workloads over the course of time will move to the cloud. Some may not, for a different set of reasons. So first, you have to look at that opportunity statement. So if you're what Google would call a service partner, others would call a system integrator, and you're really trying to help customers move to the cloud, whenever a customer signs a spend commitment, they're given different pools of funding that they can use to help them move to the cloud. My world is typically ISV and marketplace. So in that regard, when a customer signs a commit, that's a financial commitment of, over the course of X years, we will spend X dollars with this given cloud provider. And there's certain benefits that all 3 of the largest cloud marketplaces provide, which is 1, being able to tap into that cloud committed spend, 2, being able to provide consolidated billing. So on your Google invoice or on your Azure invoice or AWS invoice, you see all those purchases. And that's increasingly a differentiator, as the average enterprise now uses close to 500 SaaS applications in addition to all the other licensing types. And then finally, what each cloud provider provides is the ability to decrement that cloud's commitment to Google or to Azure or to AWS by those marketplace purchases. So as a customer, that makes them more comfortable to sign a larger commit, to get greater discounts, and it creates sort of a flywheel. From a partner perspective, that's a great lever. It's a great pull mechanism from the customer side to accelerate your transactions, particularly through cloud marketplaces. And again, in this case, as a software partner.
And Richard, how do you see that? How do you see your clients leveraging that?
Well, I think that the key is, and this is a little bit of maybe 101 for the folks that are on the line, but is that this world is different in that it's really driven by consumption. And so it's not that big of a stretch for the cloud providers to say, hey, look, our goal is to get you to consume more. And from the customer's point of view, it's not that big of a stretch to say, hey, yeah, and over time, we actually think that we will consume more, which is what fuels this whole idea behind the commitments. The big thing that's happened is this concept of co-selling that's going on in these spaces. Most of the cloud providers recognize that what drives consumption is often a third party coming in and selling their software solution on top of the cloud platform. And so most of them let you retire that commitment by buying third party software that's part of the platform. And so that's the opportunity for you guys as vendors, is to kick into that so that you can go to your customers and you can say, we can help you retire your commitment by buying our solution. And likewise, the customers go to the vendors and say, hey, look, we've already committed to this, so it's already in our budget, it's already in our spending plan, so therefore we need you to be in the marketplace and therefore buy into that whole area. And so that's the fundamental economic model that's kind of driving both the partnerships, the why you want to be in the marketplace, how customers are buying from a buying pattern. And so really understanding that concept is pretty important if you don't have it already.
I'm going to add on a slightly contrarian point of view, because everything they're saying about marketplace is absolutely true, and Brian's point about committed spend is absolutely true. But coming in, having been at Microsoft when we launched Azure, there was the challenge of how do you get AWS committed customers to commit to Azure? Okay, well, that's convert the EA agreement they already have into a cloud agreement, put cloud credits in it, and start transitioning those agreements. Coming in 10 years later is Oracle, and coming in much later and trying to launch a new cloud, where you've got multi-billion-dollar committed cloud spends at Azure and GCP and AWS, and trying to carve out of there. You typically find customers are in one of three buckets. Either they're on track and they've got their commitment right, in which case they're using third-party vendors and marketplaces effectively, and they've got a plan. And they've got a significant amount of budget that sits outside of that commitment to do stuff that can't be done on the cloud or needs to go to a different cloud. And that's where, like, Oracle's found some footprint going after enterprise applications that were written outside of the cloud committed spend. For customers that bought into the everything's going to the cloud and then finding, 5 years into it, no, not everything is really going to the cloud you chose because of performance limitations or economics or whatever reason. It can be a barrier. And so part of the relationship that you saw Oracle and Azure develop and Microsoft develop over putting OCI regions inside the Azure tenancy was to help those customers be able to consume what they committed to Azure in an environment that could actually deliver the enterprise database performance services they need with the app tier running on Azure. So these commitments lead to, like, you are committed on both sides, right? On one side, as a customer, you're committing to the vendor. On the other side, the vendor is committing to deliver a result. Where those don't meet, where the result isn't being delivered, there is significant conflict in the industry on overcommitment and how do we actually burn down without losing. Now, this is a contemporaneous thing, and I'm sort of independent from all of the clouds now, so I'll just speak openly about this. But the challenge that I think Azure has right now is they have a lot of customers who are deeply committed to Azure, and they've got to go stand in front of those customers and ask them to commit to Copilot as part of Microsoft 365 and expansion. If they don't have a path to burn down their Azure credits, that's a hard sale. So overcommitment can lead to sales problems and engagement problems as much as undercommitment can lead to in adoption problems. So there's a double-edged sword about overselling the cloud there that people should be cautious about.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Brian, I'm with AWS. I've got a great relationship with them. Things are working very well. How easy is it for me to add Google? What else do I need to do? Can my people easily switch to working with Google Cloud as well as AWS? What are the things that I'm going to be facing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And maybe I'll try to quickly answer this across 3 different partner types, because partners are not, the engagement model is very different depending what type of partner you are. So I'll start with ISV, again, because that's my primary day-to-day. And I think, the key things are that we really look for in terms of co-sell success is, one, making sure that you've got a deployment that at least partially runs on Google Cloud. We fund a lot of our investments out of that consumption margin, and increasingly there's a lot of downward pressure on cloud marketplace revenue share. So we really look for that first. We look for the ISV to list in marketplace. And then I think the most important thing, and the biggest mistake I see, is partners, especially in the software space, see that they are many things to many different people. So industry verticals, geographies, use cases, and they often try to drink the ocean, so to speak, and do everything to everyone, and then don't realize that that's not necessarily the best approach. So partners who get started, and I think this applies to Azure as well, of really looking at what is the right wave to surf, what's the right ideal customer profile, thinking about the alignment of which industry verticals, which customer types, which geographies, is there the best mutual alignment with that cloud provider, and how can I be successful there, and sort of surfing one wave at a time. What you'll find from a program perspective, each of the cloud providers has different programs, but a lot of the fundamentals are still the same, of telling a better together story, of building momentum, of engaging sales teams, et cetera. Quickly to touch on the two other engagement models from a service perspective, if you're a service provider, ideally you're probably already following whatever the customer is asking you. So most GSIs, for example, really focus on under 100 very strategic accounts, and they tend to sort of follow the market direction. So making sure that you've got delivery teams who have experience with that respective cloud provider, and making sure that the whole delivery team is not learning on the job is super important to success. And there, similarly with riding the right wave, focusing on the right use case within the right industry vertical is super important. And then finally, with a resell, so a more traditional channel resell motion, cloud marketplaces are key. Canalys estimates that 30% of cloud marketplace transactions will have a reseller involved. We actually think it potentially could be larger than that. And in certain categories like cybersecurity, Canalys says that 91.5% are going through the channel overall, and we would expect cloud marketplaces over time to match that. So that's a couple quick points on the three engagement models we see.
Excellent. And Richard, what do you advise your clients? What are their biggest challenges when they move from, say, a single platform to moving to a multiple platform? And what resources do they have to bring to bear to do that?
So I think you got three kind of areas. You've got technology, you've got process, and you've got programs. I think that the technology is unique for each of the cloud providers. You probably have to see some tweaking on the technology side to get them to work with the various different cloud providers. The good news is that's probably outside of the charter of the channel organization. The bad news is that everybody lists all of their offerings, and they're not always very carefully tuned into whether or not it actually works in a seamless manner. And so you sometimes have partner experience and customer experience issues because the technology doesn't quite work the way that the sales rep might be familiar with. From a programs point of view, to what Brian said, a lot of that is very transferable, that you can get what's working. Your co-selling program that you had with AWS will work well with Google most of the time, so you don't have to worry about that type of thing. But then the process area is where we're seeing that a lot of people need to work on is, a lot of companies, as they first go into the marketplace, these offerings and managing the offerings and tracking and, all of that type of stuff is often a manual process, that there's operational people who are working in the background, making sure that this works well from a partner experience and from a customer experience point of view. But as that starts to scale up, by now working across 2 or 3 different vendors, or that your number of transactions is multiplying, at a 70% growth rate or something like that, that quickly becomes overwhelming. So you need to make sure that your systems and your processes are enabling that, because the last thing that somebody wants to hear is, oh, we've got a 3-week backlog before we can get that to be up and running, and selling, somebody will move on to a different area. So managing those 3 buckets, understanding what you need to do, be accurate in your assessment on where you are, and then having a plan to move forward and provide scale is really the things that you need to be focusing on.
Mm-hmm. And if you look at this, how easy is it? I'm an individual, I'm working for a major software company. I've helped build our program with AWS. can I just flip to a Google, an Azure, an Oracle? Is it going to be fairly seamless for me, or is it going to be difficult?
I'll speak on that one. I think it's fairly seamless. It depends on, to a certain extent, how wired into their PaaS services your offering really is. So if I'm offering a SaaS platform that's running on, independent VMs with its own storage service and not using proprietary systems and stuff like that, it's super easy to move. It's just a container, right? You can move it over and get it working. Now, my observability, my management, my security, all that stuff is really hard to run across clouds. So you're basically doubling those teams. And so if you're a services partner does, migrate and manage, it's a big lift to do multiple clouds. If you're a dev shop that builds stuff as an ISV, it's relatively low to be able to adopt it as long as you've been clean on your code and built for cloud independence. If you've built it born on AWS, adopted AWS, and everything has got a funny name, then no, you're not going anywhere. It's very painful. On the operations side, when you look at programs and people that are trying to engage and say, can I lift a program I offer as a SaaS provider on top of AWS and move that over to Azure? Yeah, you can, although you're going to miss a bunch of stuff because I think there's go-to-market program benefits that each cloud provider has that are unique. So I would argue technical isolation and independence is a strategy, but then maximize the opportunity around the programmatic engagement these things bring, whether it's marketplace functions that Brian does, or Founders Hub at Azure, or working with the AI team at Oracle, or whatever the innovation wave that you're involved in is. But I think that technical isolation is really something people should strive for.
Okay. Yeah. And we got some great questions coming in. The first of them is, each of these clouds seem very much geared towards enterprise solutions. From your experience, do you think there is a day where SMBs may look to utilize more of these cloud services? How are you seeing the trend?
I have a strong point of view on this. No, is the short answer. Meaning, and I'm dogmatic on this one, so I look for my co-panelists to pull me back from this one, but clouds are built, not bought. SaaS solutions are bought. And in the land of SMB, unless it's core to your business, like my offering is the tech platform I'm doing, almost everything is context. It's not core to your business. So buy a SaaS platform, buy a, Dynamics or a NetSuite as your ERP, buy a, HubSpot platform for your marketing, buy, Seamless for, all those services are out there. You don't need to go build something there. So I think it's kind of a challenge when you look at the SMB space of, do I really want to build bespoke applications and manage the fragility of a custom built environment? Most SMBs are not doing that. And until you get, 300, 400 users, then you start getting into stuff. But largely that's moving to low code apps. And you're starting to see extensions off of those SaaS platforms being low or no code or AI generated apps like Power Apps, against Microsoft SaaS platforms and things like that. So I think the question's a good one, which is, do you ever see? Yeah, of course, but not at mass adoption. You guys think different?
I think
Ross, I might add more from kind of a programmatic and co-sell perspective. It really, I think, works backwards from how customers buy. And I actually started off my career at Microsoft in the small business team.
Yeah.
And not a lot's changed in 17 years in terms of how small customers buy. I mean, we're saying less than 500 users in the question. There's a lot of differing variations of how you would define SMB, either by revenue or number of computers or number of employees. But I think, increasingly when we kind of look at the co-sell motion or the go-to-market motion, this is where managed service providers, this is where resellers really come into play. So there's definitely a triangulation that occurs. So it depends. I don't know, Isaac, what type of organization you're representing, but if you're representing, let's say, a software company, it's really I think that triangulation that's the most important here. And I would say, for Google, what's interesting is Workspace, so our online productivity suite, is actually very concentrated in SMB and has a pretty strong SMB motion. But with, I think, Google Cloud, as well as with Azure, the go-to-market motion tends to not necessarily be enterprise focused, but relies on partners for SMB and mid-market.
I think that the two acid tests that you might want to have is our solution part of a technology stack the more it's a part of a stack as opposed to a standalone product. So if all they're using is HubSpot, they're just going to go buy a subscription to HubSpot. But if they are using HubSpot and then they want to have that feed into a different platform, they also want 6 Sense, and they also want this other type of stuff. That's when you start getting the interest of MSPs, and now they're going out there and they're building value-added solutions around it. And all of those types of things then start to lean towards going to a cloud provider as opposed to just a cloud solution, a software as a service. So I think that that's a good way to kind of gauge whether or not your solution is going to be playing in this space. Now, I do think that there's a convenience factor to buying a cloud solution that is at play that may change that. I mean, I hate to admit it, I buy my groceries online. I buy, not everything from Amazon, but if I can get something delivered to my doorstep as opposed to going to a store, that's nirvana to me. And I think that the same thing is driving a little bit of the buying behavior. So the more accessible marketplaces become, the more convenient they become, the more I can just go online, and if I need to add users or functionality, I can just go and do it. That's going to bring small businesses in because they're going to just like that convenience factor.
Yeah, and I might just add 2 quick comments there to just build on what Richard said. One, part of it depends how technically sophisticated that small organization is. So, sort of the initial assumption is most small companies don't necessarily have a CIO or CTO, but a lot of them are actually pretty technically savvy, particularly if they're digital native. So that's where I would say it's a little more nascent with all 3 cloud providers, but the product-led growth model of being able to, if I'm an individual developer, purchase through a cloud marketplace licenses of a vector database that I want to sort of test and then deploy, and then over time maybe graduate to a private offer, is a growing scenario. And the other piece, just to build off Richard's point, increasingly millennials are becoming decision makers and purchase makers, and they often don't want to talk to a sales rep. And so these digital sales channels have a lot of appeal to them.
I do want to distinguish, though, between IaaS and PaaS versus SaaS. I absolutely think marketplaces and adopting those things will go really well. But I just constantly go back, sub 100, I really don't see people building fragile applications they have to manage over time versus having a partner run it for them as an MSP. And that's really, if I need something proprietary, I'll have a partner turn it into a service back to me instead of me running it.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of, when you look at outside tech customers, so not a digital native, as Brian points out, but, your retailer that's running a Midwest auto supply shop, what are they doing in the cloud? They're buying a point of sale solution as a SaaS solution. They're buying an ERP solution as a SaaS solution. They may use Zapier and some low code apps to build a time card app to plug into it, but nothing really that they have to maintain. So I still don't see that changing necessarily. I see more no code and low code solutions coming online to extend SaaS platforms to be able to do that customization, as opposed to I'm going to hire a developer and they're going to go build something in the cloud for me.
Yep.
But where am I going to buy those SaaS platforms? I'm going to buy them from a marketplace, and how does that tie into the whole piece?
Well, I mean, that's the whole thesis John Street has with PAX 8 and the notion of a digital distributor, and how do I curate that through partners? So I think there's models out there like that have come along. Now, is that the right model? It's a model. I think it's working pretty well. I think there's other marketplaces that will emerge. And what we have yet to see is really truly cloud independent marketplaces that can function into the clouds themselves. And that's kind of like, what Steam is to games. There is no enterprise Steam for apps across clouds. Yeah. I think that's an inevitability. I'm not going to go fund it, but that's something that I think will exist at this point, right?
I think maybe to move on, B, I think, has a great question. So Rod, if you don't mind, I'll MC for just a second and move on to that one, which is, our partners are cautious sometimes about going into this space because they aren't sure where their play is. And, you know, I think that that's really relevant to actually this specific discussion. We've done, you know, some studies, and you know, with trying to be polite to the AWS folks that may or may not be on the call or not, there is a real lack of trust of Amazon and AWS as not ultimately going to absorb the business that the ISVs are providing. They have a history of doing that, and are being litigated at this point in time about whether or not they're doing that on the Amazon side of the business. You know, they have part of their values that they are all about, you know, integrating the stack into providing an end-to-end solution. You know, so there's a lot of you know, challenges there. And Amazon and Google both argue that they have a stronger history in working with partners. You know, Oracle's a little bit in between. And you know, so there is, I think, reason for partners to be cautious, and for you know, there to be a trust issue in terms of how it is that you're working. Now, that said, what we have seen is that truly, I think all of the vendors recognize that you get scale from partners. You know, particularly around technology solutions, it is never quite as turnkey as someone, you know, just hitting checkboxes and everything, you know, working. And so, you know, partners are an integral part of this. And so how they work with partners is a core strategy for everybody, including AWS, and they're all trying to, you know, work and figure that out. So I think that there is a trust element there. It should go into your selection of who are the cloud providers that you're working with. But I think that there's also a pretty strong commitment, and that partners aren't going to get written out of the equation, you know, in at least the short term.
I do want to address, Rod, before we go on the partner thing, about Oracle, because Oracle has a problematic history of partnering, I would say. And if you go to their history, it really wasn't a partner-centric company in its value prop. It's, here's 4 enterprise applications that run all your regulated systems, delivered on an engineered appliance, running our database, running our operating system, running our Java, delivered by our services team. Not exactly a partner play. When you go to the cloud, you know, part of the strategy that Oracle's had has been, don't trust us. We'll give you encryption keys. You as the ISV can encrypt everything, and nobody at Oracle can see anything you're doing. Get a partner to run it for you as an MSP. Get Accenture to manage your SAP environment. The largest SAP environment in the public cloud is running in Oracle Cloud for Loblaws in Canada, and it was put there by Accenture. So a big part of the, you know, cultural strategy at Oracle is, don't try to change Oracle, but go create a product. You don't need to trust us. You own the keys. There's no ability for us to inspect anything, and you can go run it. More importantly, you can have your own version of it and build your own instance of Oracle Cloud that you run as a partner, with Oracle having no visibility into it. And so this notion of deliver the tech, don't deliver the business model of Oracle with every cloud is really key to partnering, which is, you can build a completely different, like IBM delivers Maximo on top of Oracle Cloud to their customers, independent, largely from our team. So that notion of build a platform that allows for partners to operate without interference, as opposed to trust us, is a bit of a different position. But why fight the brand? Just go ahead and be, you know, give them the tools.
Yeah, and I might add a couple things. So I think, you know, if we take a step back, Microsoft has the longest history here, and you know, they were pretty forward thinking in the 90s in earnings calls, talking about the number of dollars generated for the channel and the ecosystem of partners. And I believe it was $7 per Microsoft dollar that was made. That said, you know, I think we're all aware, for those of us who've been around for a while, anytime that there's changes in business models or delivery models, that has impact on the full channel. And it's a huge responsibility. I mean, I remember when I was at Microsoft, you know, having these debates of any major program change, you knew that businesses would be created and businesses would go out of business as a result. So kind of more on the program or delivery side, I think the best thing to do is to really keep up with the customer and how they prefer to buy and use products. And ultimately, that's where the cloud providers are following. The other piece where there's more kind of direct competition, either for providing services or to resell goods, or maybe there's a similar software element. I really think, again, it's about focusing on the customer. So for Google, we've stated our goal is 100% partner attach. And if you look at, for example, generative AI, in our model garden, we have 130 models. So that includes first-party models like Gemini. It also includes third-party models like Anthropic or AI 21 Labs. And so really, it's about the customer being able to choose what's best for them. And that's where I would always sort of orient any concerns around redundancy of making sure that you've got a really compelling and differentiated solution.
Yeah.
And Brian, while I've got you there, there's been a lot of talk about how easy or difficult it is. I'm an ISV. I want to get a bunch of my partners approved and ready to roll on some of these alternative platforms. If I'm an ISV, I'm doing, I've got a program with Google. How easy is it for me to get my partners accredited by Google? What's actually involved? What do I need to do?
Yeah. So again, I think it depends on your delivery model or which type of partner you are, but to kind of focus on the software piece and to maybe actually resurface a couple points that both Richard and Ross made as well. You can kind of think of the technology piece in kind of two buckets. So more sort of general infrastructure and then more what we would call higher level services. So if you've got a lot of core infrastructure, so compute, networking, storage, that's a lot sort of easier to move. So the first stage is typically to port a version of your application, and you might have multiple applications, so choosing which to move at the right time. And then over the course of time, looking at these higher level services. So services like enterprise data warehouses, like AI, like cloud databases. And over the course of time, the deeper the technical integration, typically the more successful the partnership is over time. But to get started, I think it's really working back from your customers and understanding what are the clouds that my customers are using. So as part of your sales motion, all of your sellers should be asking, which clouds are you using? Who do you have a cloud commit with? And that's a pretty good signal for which secondary or tertiary cloud that you want to support. Initially, sort of porting the application is not typically a huge lift, but then maintaining both deployments can be, depending on your solution. So each of these clouds have different levels of technical debt and different architectural decisions. With Google being one of the newer clouds, a lot of partners will tell us that if they have a modern development methodology, it's very easy and quick to move. If maybe they've built on a lot of legacy architectures and deployment methods, it can be more challenging. But then again, programmatically, as Richard said, it's a lot of the same fundamentals of focus, relevance, and repeatability of really nailing what are those waves you're going to surf and building momentum where ideally areas you already have existing success and then expanding upon it.
I think that one of the things that Brian triggered as he was talking through it is, one of the things that the hope that most vendors have is that 70-80% of their partners will make the migration to whatever it is that they're trying to do, and our experience has been that it's always a much smaller number. That it's probably 20 to 30%. So if you're already on AWS and you launch Azure and your hope is that 80% of your partners are going to now support both of them, it's probably not going to be the case. It's probably only going to be, 20, 30% of them that actually do, which means that you not only have to have that motion in play, but you're going to have to do a recruitment motion where you're going to the Azure partners and saying, hey, guess what? We are now a player in this marketplace and you should be selling our solution. And you probably need another motion that's looking at your existing partners that aren't participating in AWS, but may or may not be participating with Azure, and going to them and saying, hey, look, we know that for whatever reason you weren't interested in AWS, we are now available on Azure. So there will be a recruitment effort that you need to be having, as well as a migration effort that you're going to be trying to do. And quite often we see companies focus on a migration effort and spend a lot of money trying to get those partners to move over, and for whatever reason they're just not, many of them don't do that. So you have to be thinking about a broader scale effort as you do this type of thing.
I'm going to be slightly contrarian and disagree with you, Richard,
Yep.
because it makes for an interesting panel. But I'll make the argument that there's roughly 800 to 1,000 partners that really matter to the public cloud. The vast majority of them don't. They're doing small applications, but when you look at enterprise systems of record and the regulated systems, things that run their business, their ERP, their human capital management, their supply chain, all those things, they're either remaining on-prem or they're getting completely rewritten at great expense, or they're moving to OCI. And one of the unique things about Oracle Cloud is the way it's architected is different than the other guys. So I won't go into a whole technical view on it, but there isn't an enterprise workload that doesn't run in OCI. And there isn't a single version of OCI that can't run on premise. So the whole notion of cloud or on premise goes away. It just becomes a way of delivering compute for enterprise applications at scale, regardless of location. It could be in a partner data center, it could be in a sovereign cloud, it could be in the customer's data center, any of those things. So a lot of these either or discussions are going away with engineering, and you're starting to see next gen services come out, and including on AWS and things like that with Nitro 2 and what they've done with their network and trying to create a different control plane and steps of engineering towards that. Can you build a cloud that could run everything, as opposed to the cloud that can run cloud native really well, or run VMs really well, or run serverless really well, or those sorts of things. So engineering isn't done in the cloud. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest lessons is, otherwise, our spend on the balance sheet, if you looked at all 4 cloud providers, would be a lot smaller in capital expense, but massive amounts of engineering is going on to still innovate around enterprise workloads and make it so the cloud isn't a place and it isn't a process, but it's a way of delivering every compute capability you need. Now, are we going to get there quickly? I think Oracle's gotten there, and now it's a chance for other folks to play catch up in that area. But are we as good on cloud native and the breadth of services the other guys have? No, that's why they're differentiated. So again, this goes back to the multi-cloud. I think people are becoming different in different ways that are materially beneficial to customers, which lends itself to, as a partner, you really do have to look and say, by workload, which cloud is the right place? And it's not a on-prem versus cloud anymore. It's which provider, which mode of delivery. Right?
I wasn't arguing about.
If I could just cut in there for a sec, guys, we've got a bunch of questions coming in that I'd love to get answered. So if we can have quick answers on each of these to give people the help that they're looking for. And Richard, you're on my screen, so I'll start with the first one for you. Is the trend for public cloud waning as customers learn about the hidden costs?
I don't think so. I don't think it's the hidden cost. I think it's the applicability of what it is that they're trying to do. I mean, the public cloud has some limitations to it in that you're renting an apartment as opposed to owning a home, and so whether or not you want to run as a private cloud or as a sovereign cloud or something along those lines, those are usually driven by the capabilities and the concerns around security and issues around there a little bit more than the hidden costs. But I do think that you should be looking for partners that can support public, private, hybrid, sovereign, but bluntly, all of the big players can do those types of things.
Look, I'll answer this really quickly, Rod. Super quick. Brian, say it with me. 28% year-on-year growth rate at $9.6 billion for Google, announced 4 days ago. I don't think it's slowing down. I mean, just look at any financial report.
Yeah, and the Gartner spend forecast for cloud computing is 12 points higher than general IT spend. So
Right.
I know that, you might discount where I'm coming from working for a cloud provider, but I know there's certain LinkedIn articles and there's certain maybe workloads or use cases where, depending how you measure costs, there may be some movement. But again, I just believe over the course of time, each cloud will become more sophisticated and the vast majority of workloads will move towards the cloud.
Right.
Fabulous. And Brian, while I've got you front and center on my screen, we've got a question about if I want to be my company's expert on multi-cloud, where should I go to find and build the expertise I need? What are the sort of resources out there to help the folks on the call learn more about this, learn more about how to really engage in a channel place with the cloud providers?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit obviously depends on your role. So if you're in a technical role, going for some of the certifications, going through some of the trainings, learning about their architectural approach, sort of diving in there. I'm going to assume the majority of folks in the call are more in a partnership, alliance, sales,
Absolutely.
marketing type of a role. And this is where, if you're a leader, when I was at AWS, the number one source of attrition I had was to partners. And it's a common best practice of, I need someone who's going to quote unquote develop a PhD in that specific cloud provider, learn about their programs, learn about their certifications, learn about their incentives, learn really sort of what makes momentum go with them. That's a great way if you're a manager or a leader of looking for someone who's either worked with or for that cloud provider. And if not, if you're maybe an individual contributor, raising your hand and saying, look, I want to dive deep into Google Cloud or Azure or Oracle. And it's really more about a time investment and just learning about the different programs and mechanisms that each of them employ.
Okay. And I'll fire this one at you, Ross. We're finding hyper-converged and dominating the conversations, harvesting the existing prem with public cloud. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think that's probably from the perspective of the chair you sit in. If you sit in a hyper-converged vendor chair, it's going to look like that. I'm telling you, as somebody who doesn't sit in any chair anymore, the enterprise is absolutely still moving to the cloud at scale. I mean, just go look at Oracle's earnings reports and see what's happening there. I mean, it isn't slowing down, it's accelerating. And what's happening is what wasn't possible in the cloud 10 years ago is now possible. So what was assessed 10 years ago as a strategy is being revisited by all those customers. And in some cases, they're saying, you know what, with the VMware change in Broadcom and the speed I have to move, HCI is the way for me to go right now. But my long-term plan is as soon as I, figure out a strategy and get to it, I'm moving off of it. And I want this as a service and a platform that's delivered to me. I don't want to run things. And so, I mean, I've heard that from CIO after CIO after CIO after Broadcom announced the acquisition of VMware is our intention is still to move all this to the cloud. We're taking a 3-year break to go buy some Dell servers, put, Nutanix on it and run this environment as we wait for application vendor, this service, the run out of this contract or whatever other service is there. But their long-term strategies, I don't see changing. I see this as a VMware reaction right now.
Okay, and we're almost out of time, so a quick question for each of you. And Brian, if I can start with you, if I'm going to start working with Google, what are the 1 or 2 things I really need to be aware of that's going to get me off to a really successful quick start?
Yeah, I'm going to answer this from an alliance perspective. You have to, what I always like to tell people is, and it doesn't matter which cloud provider you're working with, if your goal is to jointly sell with either the Google or Azure or AWS team, you have to sell twice. You have to sell to that account team and convince them this is worth their time. All of these cloud sellers have 100+ services, even more microservices, many partners, particularly if this is a strategic customer they're supporting and entertaining. And so this is really where I go back to that message around focus and relevance of start where you already have documented success where you have customer references, where you have win wires, where you have mid to late stage pipeline, and really focus there as sort of your beachhead, so to speak, and then build one wave at a time. And with that approach, it's the same playbook the largest partners of each cloud provider have employed. That's how you get to the marquee sponsorship logo you see at an event. That's where you get to being a household name with one of these cloud providers.
And Richard, what advice have you got for people wanting to move to a new cloud platform?
I think it's having that heart-to-heart with your sales operations team or whoever it is that's on that end of the business, and say, if we double the number of our orders that are going to cloud providers operationally, are you able to handle that? Or if we now need to do reporting across these other systems, are you able to handle that? And getting a real accurate bead on how much of it is a manual process and how much of it is an automated process, and are you going to break? Because the moment the sales reps see that they can't fulfill the deal with the customers, that's a really hard hole to dig yourself out of.
Excellent. And Ross, final thoughts, anything we've missed, anything else we should have covered?
So I think there's a lot of people who have been here in terms of how to really adopt multi-cloud and how to think about working with those, whether it's programmatically. I look at the tooling vendors that have to operate between the clouds, guys like HashiCorp with Terraform and Rackware, or DevOps folks like Jenkins and Spinnaker. Go talk to their programs people. They live every day in a multi-cloud world. They've figured out how to navigate across the marketplaces, the programs, where those things are. I think they're a hidden asset is these cross-cloud platform companies that have done either cloud financial management or DevOps or orchestration, where they've had to live across these things. There's talent there. Go hire them, pull them into your organization, get them to teach others.
Fabulous. Ross, Brian, Richard, thank you so much for some fabulous comments, some fabulous thoughts. And I think you've answered a lot of great questions from the audience. So for the audience, thank you very much for participating.
Yep.
And this will be available in recorded fashion from tomorrow. So you'll also get a link so you can review everything that's been said. You'll also see a survey as you leave. So please do complete that survey. We really, really value your feedback. But speaking for everyone in the audience, Ross, Brian, Richard, thank you so very, very much indeed.
Great.
See you guys.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.